Yo, what's good guys? It's Chad Driscoll here and welcome back to my channel. On today's episode, we're gonna be covering the trap bar deadlift. I'm gonna take you through a full tutorial of this exercise, and I think it's an exercise that you should probably start to have within your program to gain foundational compound strength, as well as build up those low back muscles, hamstrings, and glutes. So let's get into the video. And so you may be sitting there saying to the screen, Chad, do I actually need to deadlift? I've heard deadlifting is bad for your back and you may get injured. Or people over 40 shouldn't be deadlifting. Do I actually need to deadlift within my program, or can I be doing something else? Now, I'm not going to say that you absolutely have to deadlift. What I will say is what people get wrong about deadlifting is it is building up what we would call that posterior chain. So the hamstrings, the glutes, the low back, into the back extensors, even into the traps of the posterior shoulder and the lats. So that's a large amount of musculature that we use. It is also performing a very common function, standing up under load, hip hinging when we bend over and grab something. There's a lot of things that we do on a daily basis that we need to hip hinge, and training that in a weight room and overloading it is going to make us better at it in our daily life. I also think that, I know that deadlifting with proper form, proper mechanics, and loading it properly can lead to decreased symptoms of whether it's low back pain or hip pain or knee pain. Strengthening the muscles around the areas are going to significantly help you move and feel better on a regular basis. So for the people that say, oh, I got hurt deadlifting, well, I beg to differ that deadlifting was the thing that did it. Your poor form or poor load or poor coaching may have done it. So hopefully we can hash some of these things out today and get you to the point in which you are comfortable deadlifting at, or at least starting to work your way back into the deadlifting realm. And I just want to clear one more thing up before we hop into this tutorial. I don't think that there's necessarily bad exercises out there. I believe that there's bad exercise application. So for example, an exercise that's really good for me in my program that I can do properly may not be a great application and exercise for your program. Maybe you're coming off of hip surgery, or you have some cranky knees, or you have a foot fault. So there's certain exercises that for you, the individual, and everyone out there may not be the right application at this time. Maybe you need a different exercise variation. Maybe you need to regress. There's other things that we can do. Maybe you need to hit machines. But there's not necessarily a bad exercise. And that's why I get pissed off when people demonize something like a deadlift, saying it's causing low back pain, when in reality it may just be a bad application, or they may have done it wrong in the first place. So let's get into the video and I'll show you guys exactly how we do the deadlift. All right, so let's get into the overall tutorial here. We're gonna talk about the setup right now. So I'm just gonna hop over here. What I have here is a Kabuki strength trap bar. This bar is absolutely fantastic in terms of weight calibration, everything like that. If you're looking to spend a little bit more money on a really solid trap bar, this is my go-to. This thing also has an open end, so you can walk in, walk out, and you can actually stand it up, take weights off, put weights on very, very easily without having to lift that bar and have it be kind of a nuisance. So for the setup here, with any type of trap bar, regardless of what hex bar or trap bar you have, I always want you to think you always have to set up first with the feet. A lot of people ask me, well, how wide should my feet be? A lot of people tend to set up in a very wide stance, but I always tell people, hey, I want you to set up and put your feet where you feel most powerful. So if I were to ask you to jump as high as you possibly could right now, I want you to put your feet at that distance. For me, my most powerful stance is about 6 to 8 inches apart. I don't like when people get too wide within trap bar, really any deadlift, because when we start to pull this bar, we're going to start to pull this bar and we're actually going to start to scrape our shins up as the bar comes up. So what's going to happen is as we start to pull the bar up, our knees are actually going to come in, and now we're losing that kind of biomechanical alignment, and it's going to prevent us from creating a lot of force upward and through the ground to lift this weight up. So I want everything to be completely underneath each other and completely vertical. So I always kind of start with that 6 to 8 inch distance here. You also have to make sure that, hey, the load, right, so where all of the weight is aligned is in line with the midline of your body. So I always say, hey, halfway up the laces or almost at the tongue, that's where that middle of the bar should be. And the reason being is you always want the center of load, what you're lifting, closest to your own center of gravity. Biomechanically, that is the best way and the safest way to be able to lift with as much strength and power. All right, so now that we have the feet down, let's start to talk about the rest of the body positioning through this. The deadlift is a hip hinge, so we need to start to work on that actual hip hinge movement. There's just one real drill that I like to do, and this is called tipping the water out of the bowl. So very simply, what we're gonna do is we're gonna put our hands on the bony processes of our hips, of that pelvis, okay? And I want you to imagine that your pelvis is a bowl of water, and all we're gonna do is we're gonna tip the water out of the front of the bowl here. So I'm gonna put my hands on my hips, I got that bowl of water, and now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna tip it forward and pour that water out. And now what I'm in is what we call that good hip hinge position. So my hips are actually higher than my knees here. I have a good crease of the hip, and all the tension is getting taken through the hamstrings and the glutes. My weight is evenly positioned to front to back. Okay, and now I'm in a good hip hinge position. So I'm going to stand back up again, and you can stand up with me and do this if you want. I'm going to tip the water out, okay? And this is what we would call that anterior pelvic tilt. So our pelvis is kind of pointing down here, taking all the load through the hamstrings and back up. Okay, it's very different from a squat. With a squat, we would start with that hip hinge, but then we would actually drop down with a neutral pelvis and back up, and our knees would have a lot more flexion. Okay, this is what we would call that hip hinge. Now that we have that hip hinge involved, let's start to work in the rest of the body and start to work in the arms. Okay, so with the arms, the main thing to remember is you always want them to be completely vertical. In order to have maximum efficiency of power and strength, right, biomechanically, we want the arms to be completely vertical. A lot of times what people will do is they'll get really comfortable, and they're more comfortable with the weight out here. Just like we talked about in the previous setup video, that weight distribution, we need this center of load in line with the center of our gravity. Okay, so we have to adjust our body position based on here, and our arms have to be completely vertical in order to create as much force up and stay as safe as possible. So once we get into that hip hinge, all you're gonna do is drop down just a little bit, and those arms should be just outside the feet here, and then we're gonna grab. All right, now that we have the rest of the body, the arms and the hands kind of involved in our setup, I want to talk about 3 specific cues here really quickly that are going to significantly help you think about initiating that lift and performing it properly. All right, so now that we know the hand positioning, let's kind of talk about that lat engagement. So with any type of pull, right, whether it's RDL, any type of hinging, deadlift, regular deadlift, sumo, we always need to engage those lats and keep that bar in line right with our body. So what I want you to think about is taking an orange, putting it in your armpit, and we're just gonna squeeze the heck out of it while our arms are nice and straight. This is what we would call turning on those lats and creating a bunch of torque through our shoulders so that we can pull really strong and efficiently with healthy shoulders. So what I want you to do here is get into that hip hinge. Let's get all the way into our setup. We're gonna grab that weight, and then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pinch, 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 and you can notice my shoulders kind of set back, my chest kind of comes up, okay? And then we're just gonna drive up, drive through the feet, and stand, okay? Nice squeeze, squeezing the armpits, drive to the floor, stand. Okay, the second cue I want you to think about is bracing that core. The reason that we brace the core is to keep our spine safe under load. The easiest way for me to explain this to you is think about having a balloon inside of your body here. And we're gonna inhale, filling up that balloon, and that balloon's gonna go in 360 degrees. So all around the body, we're gonna inhale, and we're gonna hold that air in the balloon there, okay? So you may feel that tightness almost like you're trying to take a dump, but we're not gonna push out that way. Hope that makes sense. So that is really important as we start to lift to stay nice and braced so that our spine stays really good and neutral and strong, and it doesn't bend or do anything that it shouldn't do. All right, the third cue is to think about driving through the floor as opposed to pulling the weight off the floor. And so this is one that's very hard for people to understand from time to time, but I think once you understand it, it's going to help immensely. A lot of times I think people aren't able to deadlift as much as they could potentially, simply because they're trying to pull through their hands rather than pushing and driving through the floor. So when you're doing the deadlift, right, there's a big difference between trying to yank through your hands and then using your musculature of the legs to literally put force through the floor, right? So just like anything, Every action has a force of a reaction. So we want to develop a bunch of action and force into the floor, helping our body stand up. And what I tell a lot of people, I guess this is a fourth cue kind of on top of this, is imagine your hands are hooks, right? If you didn't have your fingers there, your hands are just hooks holding on, right? We're just hanging on. We're going to keep the lats tight. We're going to brace our core, and we're going to drive up through the floor, right? So, all right, so let's not kind of show it in full capacity here. I'm going to set up. I'm going to get my feet 6 to 8 inches, right? I'm going to tilt my pelvis over and get into that hip hinge, taking a lot of the stress through here, right? My hands are straight down. I'm going to grab. I'm going to squeeze the heck out of those oranges. I'm going to inhale, tight, tight, tight. I'm going to brace. I'm going to push. Not going to try and poop, and I'm going to drive through the floor, standing up. And we're going right back down where we came from, same thing, stay tight, 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 drive through the floor, stand up. And that is your trap bar deadlift. All right, so now that we have kind of everything compiled in, we actually completed the deadlift, let's very quickly just talk about the finish of the deadlift. So, a lot of times what I see in people is one of two things. They either don't complete the hip extension all the way through, so they're kind of sitting here with their butt back as they're up, or a lot of people, especially women, like to do one of these where they really squeeze because they think they're getting more of a squeeze here and they're pushing their hips all the way through. Well, what happens when we do this is you have a lot of direct force down on the low spine. So what I want you to think of is what I call walling up. So I want you to imagine there's a wall in front of you, there's a wall behind you, and we have to stand and not touch either of those walls when we stand all the way up. So literally all the way up, big chest, squeeze the butt cheeks, pelvis is neutral, and then we can break it again as we get back down into that deadlift. Too many times people are doing one or the other, and you're going to either feel a lot of low back tension if you're staying here, right? Because the extensions are always going to be engaged, or we're going to feel a lot of stress down on the spine as we start to poke through, and when the weight gets heavier and heavier, more things can happen. So wall up your deadlift as opposed to doing one or the other of those there. All right, guys, so that's the complete deadlift tutorial. I know that was a bunch of information that I just threw at you. So what I'm actually gonna do is I'm gonna break down each kind of coaching point and step that we went through, from the setup to the arms, into the cues that we used, and even that finish. But I'm gonna put in the description below the timing of the video and what it is. So whether it was like at 4 minutes, 2 minutes, I'm gonna put that below so you can just click to that and get to that so you don't have to keep kind of sifting back through. But I really appreciate you guys being here. If you guys do have any questions about the deadlift, whether it's sumo deadlift, conventional, or that trap bar deadlift, please go ahead and put them below. Let me know what you thought of the video. Hit that like button, and then of course, if you guys haven't yet, please subscribe to my channel so that you guys can know when all of my new videos are coming out. But until next time, guys, I'm Chad Driscoll. Thanks again for being here, and I will see you next time. Deuces.